The hills of East Tennessee hold their secrets the way old women hold their grief quietly and for a very long time. It is early November, the kind of cold that arrives without warning and stays. A county road cuts through bare hardwood ridges, past shuttered storefronts and rusted mailboxes and porches where no one sits anymore. The land looks like it has been waiting for something it has mostly stopped expecting. On a cracked concrete lot off County Road 14, a dead filling station stands under a sagging overhang. Two suitcases sit under a tarp in the bed of an old truck. A camp stove burns small on the tailgate. Inside that truck, a woman is awake in the dark, 71 years old, her hands swollen at the knuckles, her good coat still damp from yesterday's rain. She is not crying, she is thinking. And in 3 days, her husband will spend the last of what they have on something the whole county will laugh at. He will be right to do it. Eunice Leland was 71 years old, homeless, and standing in the rain watching a stranger carry her husband's recliner down the front porch steps. Nobody standing on that wet sidewalk knew that 72 hours later, Elbert would spend $16 on something the whole county laughed at, and that it would change everything. The chair had a worn spot on the right arm, shaped exactly like Elbert's hand. He had sat in that chair the night his father died, the night their first grandchild was born. 10,000 ordinary Tuesday evenings in between. Now it went into the back of a box truck like it was nobody's, like it had never belonged to anyone at all. Eunice stood on the sidewalk in front of the house she had paid for twice over, her good coat, her Sunday shoes because she hadn't known what else to wear when your own children put you out on the street. The rain came down steady and cold, and she did not move out of it, because moving felt like admitting this was real, and she was not ready to admit that yet. Elbert stood beside her, 74 years old, 40 years of diesel grease under his fingernails, and a bypass scar under his shirt that ached when it rained. He was watching the box truck the same way he watched broken engines, like if he looked long enough the problem would show him where it started. It didn't. Morton came across the lawn with an umbrella over his good coat. 46 years old. He had his father's jaw and his mother's eyes, and he used neither of them the way they were meant to be used. Dad, he stopped a few feet away. We talked about this. You talked, Elbert said. I listened. The house was drowning you. The taxes, the second mortgage from Mom's surgery. We sold it before the bank took it. That's the responsible thing. That's the only thing. Elbert looked at his son. He had taught this boy to ride a bicycle on the street. Right here, this exact stretch of cracked sidewalk. He had co-signed the loan for Morton's first business. Written checks he took 2 years to earn back. Said yes every time this boy asked. Every single time. Where are we supposed to go, Morton? Cedar Home Care. Over in the next county. It's a good facility. Nurses around the clock for Mom. It's all arranged. Morton wouldn't quite look at him. Cressy already drove up and put the deposit down. In the truck, Eunice turned her head. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see her daughter sitting in the passenger seat of Morton's car at the end of the driveway. Cressy was 42 years old. She had her mother's eyes, and she would not lift them from her phone. Not once, not even now. They don't take animals at Cedar Home, Morton said, and that was the thing that landed. Not the house, not the chair, not the $94,000 that had sold out from under them and been divided 3 ways without a single dollar offered back to the 2 people whose names were on the deed. Eunice had sat dry-eyed through all of it, but the moment Morton said those words, She understood something she had been trying not to understand since morning. He had thought of everything, every last detail arranged and decided and deposited without asking. She got out of the truck, slow, one hand on the door and one on the seat. The rain soaked her coat immediately, and she let it. Morton, her voice came out steady. She was proud of that. That animal is 14 years old. He sleeps 11 hours a day. Mom, your father pulled him out of a creek the winter you left for college. He has slept at the foot of our bed every single night since. And you want me to hand him to a shelter so I can go sit in a room in a county I've never lived in? She said it without heat, flat and plain, like reading a grocery list. No, I don't believe I will. Morton's jaw tightened. The arrangements are made. The money's already been divided. There's nothing to come back to. Divided. Elbert said it back to him. Just the word, just once. His son had the decency to color a little. The house had sold for $94,000. After the bank took its share, the remainder had been split 3 equal ways between Morton and Prewitt and Cressy. Prewitt hadn't even come today, couldn't be bothered, and not 1 cent of what remained had been offered to the 2 people who had mortgaged this house twice, once for Morton's business loan, once for the surgery that saved Eunice's life. You keep your money, Elbert said. Every dime. I don't want to hear about it again. Morton opened his mouth, closed it, glanced back at his car, at Cressy still staring at her phone, at the empty space where Prewitt should have been standing. Then he folded his umbrella and walked away through the rain, and that was the last the Lelands saw of their children for a long while. Elbert helped Eunice back into the truck, 2 suitcases in the bed under a tarp. He counted the cash in his wallet before he started the engine. $80, some change, a bypass scar under his shirt, a truck with 290,000 miles on it, a wife he had loved since Eisenhower was president. He pulled away from the only house he had ever owned, did not look in the mirror. They had no plan, which at their age was a terrifying thing to admit. Motels wanted $60 a night. Elbert did the arithmetic in his head and knew that $80 bought them 1 night with a roof and then nothing. So that first night they slept in the truck behind a shuttered hardware store on Route 9. The 2 of them reclined against each other's windows, fogging with their breath rain still coming down on the roof of the cab in a sound that was almost peaceful if you didn't think about what it meant. Eunice did not complain. That was the thing about Eunice Corder Leland that people consistently underestimated. She did not complain. She had worked 31 years in the cafeteria at Mill Creek Elementary, and she had learned early that complaining used up energy you needed for solving. She had fed hungry children on a school district budget that got smaller every year. She had stretched gravy and thin soup and known which kids needed extra and which kids needed to believe they weren't getting extra. She had learned to read a face the way some people read weather. She was reading Elbert's face now. He lay awake and she lay awake, and neither of them said so. Outside, the rain finally stopped sometime after midnight. The parking lot went quiet, and somewhere in that quiet, Eunice made a decision she didn't have words for yet. Not a plan, not a solution, just a decision that they were not going to Cedar Home Care, that they were not going to divide themselves up into separate small rooms in a building where nobody would sit at their table. That wasn't how this ended. She didn't know yet how it did end. But not that. In the morning, an old man saved them, quietly, without making a fuss. His name was Cephas Drury, and he had run the filling station out on County Road 14 back when it was still worth running. The chain had pulled out years ago. The pumps were dead, but Cephas still owned the lot, a square of cracked concrete under a sagging overhang with a pump island that hadn't moved fuel in a decade and a half. He found Elbert at the edge of his lot at first light, brewing instant coffee on a camp stove balanced on the tailgate. Cephas had expected to have to run somebody off. Instead, he looked at the truck and the camp stove and the 2 suitcases under the tarp and the small woman inside the cab with her hands around a paper cup. He looked at all of that and understood the whole story without a word being said, because Cephas Drury was 75 years old and had seen most of the ways a life could come apart. "You can leave the truck here long as you need," he told Elbert. "Nobody's gonna bother you. There's a spigot around back still works. Gas station 2 miles up will let you use the bathroom if you buy a coffee." He paused, looked at the sky. "Hard winter coming. You'll want to figure something better than a truck cab before it does." "I know it," Elbert said. "I'm working on it." He was not working on it. He had absolutely no idea what he was working on. They lasted 2 more nights in the cab. Cephas left them alone and didn't ask questions, which was its own kind of grace. On the 3rd morning, Elbert walked up to the gas station for coffee. 2 miles there, 2 miles back. He needed the walk, needed to think. He didn't think of anything useful, but on the corkboard inside the gas station, between a notice about a missing cat and an ad for firewood, he found a flyer. County Surplus Auction, Saturday, 9 a.m., the lot behind the county garage, impounded and abandoned vehicles, seized property, equipment, sold as is where is, cash only. Elbert read it twice. Then he went still in the way Eunice recognized from 49 years of marriage. The look he got when a stubborn problem started giving up its answer. 40 years as a diesel mechanic, the last 30 keeping the entire fleet of Harwick County school buses running. Every cold morning, every breakdown on every back road. He knew machines the way some men know scripture. He knew that at a surplus auction full of seized junk, there was always one thing nobody wanted, and that thing was always the cheapest. He did not tell Eunice what he was thinking. He just drove them over Saturday morning and said they were going to go look. The lot behind the county garage was full of cold men in coveralls and ball caps, breath-steaming hands jammed in pockets, repossessed boats, a wrecked county patrol car, a backhoe with a cracked block. The auctioneer worked through them fast, his voice a flat, rattling drone, the regulars bidding in little flicks of the hand that an outsider could barely see. Elbert walked the rows with Eunice on his arm until he found it, parked crooked at the far end, where they put the things they expected to scrap, a motorhome. Old, the boxy kind they built in the late 70s, maybe 26 feet of it. The white paint had gone the color of weak tea and peeled down to gray primer in long strips, one tire flat, vines grown up through the front bumper and into the grill. A bird had nested in the side mirror. Somebody had spray painted a number on the windshield in orange, and a strip of weathered tape on the door read in faded marker, "Seized. 15 years no title claim." The other men walked past it without slowing down. Elbert stopped. He laid his hand flat on the cold, dead hood and left it there a while. "Elbert," Eunice said it carefully, "that is a ruin. It's got an engine in it." He crouched, knees popping, and looked underneath. "Big block by the size of that hood. They don't make junk out of those. They make them out of iron." He stayed down there a moment, came back up slower than he went down. Frame solid, no rot through. Whoever parked it on gravel, not dirt. And then what? He didn't answer that. because he didn't have an answer yet. He just kept looking at the thing. The auctioneer reached the end of the row. His voice changed when he got to the orange number. Went careful, like he'd reached the part of the list he'd been dreading. All right, last one, folks. Lot 41, one motorhome year, unknown, no title, sold as scrap. County's just glad to be shut of it. A pause. Who'll start me at 50? Nobody moved. A few men laughed low. 40, 30, somebody give me 20 for the scrap steel alone. A man near the front called out, give you 20 to haul it off, Earl. The lot laughed harder. The auctioneer almost smiled. Going once for nothing then, and the county will cut it up. $16. Elbert said it flat and clear. The lot turned to look at him. An old man in a flannel coat with a small gray-haired woman on his arm. Somebody snorted. Somebody else said loud enough to carry, Buddy, you gotta pay to get rid of that thing, not pay to keep it. The auctioneer looked at Elbert for a long second, looked at his face, and whatever he saw there, he decided not to make sport of it. I got $16 from the gentleman in the back. 16 going once, going twice. The gavel came down on the hood of a parked truck. Sold for 16. Lord help you, mister. The laughter rolled around the lot one more time. Eunice felt her face go hot and stared straight ahead. But Elbert walked up to the folding table, counted out a 10 and a 5 and a 1 from his wallet, and signed his name where the clerk pointed. When he came back to her, he was folding the receipt into his shirt pocket like it was something worth keeping. Elbert Leland, she said quietly, we have $64 left in the world, and you just spent some of it on something the county couldn't give away. I know what it looks like. He took her arm and they started back toward the truck, slow, across the cold concrete. But you tell me what else $16 buys two people who got put out on the street. He stopped and looked back at the wreck in the weeds. It's got 4 wheels and a roof. That's more than they left us with. She did not have an answer for that. After a minute, she put her other hand over his, and they walked the rest of the way without talking. It took Cephas and a borrowed tow chain to drag the thing onto the lot the next day. The flat tire shrieked across the concrete the whole way. They parked it under the dead overhang beside the truck, and Cephas wished them luck and went home without asking what they planned to do with it. And then it was just the two of them and the wreck and the cold afternoon. Elbert walked all the way around it twice, touching it, reading it with his hands. Eunice stood and watched her husband come back to life a little, and it scared her almost as much as it hardened her, because she had come to know across a lifetime with this man that he only went quiet like this when he was about to take on something far too big for him. And he was almost always right that it was too big. And he almost always did it anyway. That night, they slept in the truck again because the motorhome was full of 15 winters of dark. But Elbert could not sleep. Around 3 in the morning, he gave it up. He took the flashlight from the glove box and reached into his coat for the pocket watch. His father's the one he never left anywhere, the one with the cracked crystal, and the hour hand stopped at 4:32, and he held it for a moment the way he always did when he was about to do something that mattered. His father used to say a thing, not often, only when it was true. A good mechanic can't fix the watch he's wearing. Take someone else looking to see what stopped. Elbert put the watch back in his pocket and crossed a few cold feet of concrete to the wreck. The door had swollen in its frame. He worked the blade of his pocket knife around the seam, put his shoulder into it, and it gave all at once with a sound like a held breath, finally let go. A smell rolled out at him, dust and mouse and old grease, and underneath all of that something else, something faintly sweet, like a kitchen that had been closed up with the bread still in it. He raised the flashlight and put the beam inside. It was not empty. That was the first thing he understood, and it stopped him with one boot on the step. He had expected a gutted shell, torn seats, a stripped cab. Instead, the beam moved across a long steel counter, bolted down the driver's side. A deep cast iron griddle set into it. Above that, a window cut into the wall of the bus, with a hinged flap propped over it like a serving shutter. Shapes crowded the far end under canvas tarps, gone stiff with age. Pots by the round shoulders of them, a stack of something square and flat, and bolted to the wall, a row of hooks, and on the hooks, ladles. Eunice, he said it not loud, but she was already awake. She was always awake when he was, and she was already coming across the concrete in her coat with her arms wrapped around herself, and he gave her his hand, and she came up the step beside him into the dark, and the two of them stood in the doorway of the thing they had bought for $16 and looked at a kitchen. "What in the world?" Eunice whispered. Elbert moved the light along the wall and stopped, beneath the grime, where someone had once painted words across the inner panel in tall, careful letters, a few strokes of faded blue showing through the dust. Eunice reached up with the side of her swollen thumb. Slow, she wiped a clean stripe through 15 years of grime, and a letter came clear under her hand. Then another, and Elbert held the light steady on it while she kept going, kept wiping, neither of them saying a word, because down at the dark end of the bus, the first tarp had begun to slide off the thing it covered. The letters came clear, one stroke at a time, blue paint surfacing through a decade and a half of dust, a whole word, then a second word beneath it smaller, Bertella's Kitchen, and under it, in a careful hand that had clearly meant every letter everybody eats. Eunice lowered her hand and stood looking at it. Elbert held the flashlight steady. At the dark end of the bus, the stiff tarp finished its slow slide and dropped to the floor with a soft thud of dust, and the beam swung over what it had been hiding. Pots, a whole nested tower of them, big aluminum stock pots, scaled for feeding a crowd, a cast iron skillet as wide across as a manhole cover, a coffee urn tall enough to serve a wedding. Stacked beside them, square and flat, a column of cafeteria trays, brown molded plastic with divided compartments, washed and stacked and waiting. "It's a kitchen," Eunice said again, and her voice did something on the second word that she hadn't expected. Elbert stepped the rest of the way up into the bus, the floor held under his weight, good marine plywood laid down with care. He ran the light along the steel counter, the deep griddle, the propane lines, the serving window with its hinged shutter, and a little hand-lettered card still thumbtacked above it, the ink gone brown. He leaned close and read it out loud. "Tuesdays the school, Thursdays the river road, Sundays whoever's left." He looked at his wife in the dark. This wasn't somebody's camper Eunice. Somebody fed people out of this thing. They did not sleep again that night. They could not. They sat on the bus floor in their coats, with the flashlight standing on its end, throwing light up at the ceiling, and they began going through what a stranger had left behind. There was a tin bread box bolted to the counter so it would not slide on turns. Inside it, instead of bread, a recipe box, green metal with a hinged lid. Eunice opened it with her swollen fingers and lifted out a stack of index cards, soft at the corners from handling. They were not fancy recipes. Biscuit dough that stretched a 5-pound bag of flour, bean soup that fed 40, cornbread in sheet pans, a card that just said in that same careful hand, "When the milk's short more drippings, they won't know the difference and it sticks to their ribs longer." Eunice read that one twice, and pressed it flat against her knee. "This is a woman who fed a lot of people on not much money." Her voice came out different than usual, quieter. "I know this handwriting. I don't mean I know her. I mean I know this. This is how you cook when you've counted every nickel and there's still a line of children at the door." Under the recipe box in the cabinet beneath the counter, Albert found the ledgers. 9 of them. Fat composition books with marbled covers, rubber banded together in 3 bundles. He worked the brittle band off the top bundle, and it snapped and crumbled in his fingers. He opened the first book to the middle and turned the flashlight on it, and then he went quiet in a way that made Eunice look over. It was a list of names, page after page of first names in 2 columns, a date beside each one, a short note. He read down the page with his lips moving, then handed the book to his wife without a word. She held it to the light. "Donnie R. likes the crust ends. Save him too. The littlest Combs girl. Don't say nothing about her shoes. Extra milk. Marcus and them 4 of them. Now the mamas working nights at the plant. Sundays especially. Cass. Won't take it if you make a fuss. Set it down and walk off. He'll eat when you're not looking." Eunice turned the page, and the next, and the next. The names went on for years. The dates climbed through one winter and into the next, and the next, and the next. She wrote them all down. Eunice's voice had gone to something barely above a whisper. Every child she ever fed. Her finger rested under a line and stayed there. And look, she didn't write down what she gave them. She wrote down what they liked. Her voice thickened on that. Albert. She knew every one of these children by what they liked. That's not a charity. A pause. That's a grandmother with 200 grandchildren. Albert did not trust himself to answer that, so he kept digging in the cabinet, and at the back of it, flat against the wall, he found the last thing, a sheet of writing paper, folded once, gone soft and yellow. He smoothed it on his knee and read it in the flashlight beam, and his voice came out rough. "To whoever finds my old bus," he read. "If you're reading this, then I have gone on, and I am sorry I could not finish. There is a list of folks in these books I did not get back around to before I got sick. I would take it as a kindness if you would. A hungry child remembers who fed him a lot longer than he remembers being hungry. I have learned it the hard way from both ends of it. There is one stop I never made on the river road, a family with a daughter named after a..." And there it stopped. The pen had trailed off the bottom of the page. The rest of the sentence had never been written. The family at the end of the river road had never been named. For a long minute, neither of them said anything. Outside the bus, the first gray light was starting to come up over the dead pump island. A single bird had begun to sing somewhere out in the cold. Eunice folded the letter close, gentle, like it might come apart in her hands. "We have to find out who she was," she said. Cephas Drury knew, of course. The old ones always know. He came by mid-morning with a thermos of real coffee and a sack of biscuits his daughter had made, having decided sometime in the night that the Lelands were his to look after now. Albert showed him the painted name on the side of the bus, and the old man stood there in the cold and took his cap off, which told Eunice most of what she needed to know before he said a word. "Bertel Tatum." Cephas said it slow. "Lord, I haven't thought about that rig in years." He turned the cap in his hands. "You bought Bertel's supper bus for $16. "You knew her," Eunice said. "Everybody knew her, everybody our age." A pause. "She lost her husband in the Harwick mine, back before they closed it. No children that lived, and instead of curling up and going bitter, which God knows she had the right, she took the insurance money and bought that old motorhome and put a griddle in it, and she started driving the Hollows feeding kids. He nodded at the bus. Whole county fed 2 generations of poor children out of that thing. School lunch didn't reach the back roads then. Half those kids, that was the hot meal they got. She'd park outside the school mornings and feed the ones that came in hungry. Then she'd run a loop out the river road to the old folks who couldn't get to town. What happened to her? Elbert asked. Cancer. Kept driving longer than she should have. Then one winter, she just wasn't out there anymore. We heard she'd passed. The old man's voice dropped. Her kin, what kin she had left, was 2 counties over and didn't want the bus, didn't want the trouble of it. So it sat. County finally hauled it in for the back taxes on the tags, and there it sat 15 years. He looked at Elbert. Till you come along. $16? Elbert said. $16. Cephas put his cap back on. Well, it found the right fool anyhow, and he meant it as the kindest thing he knew how to say, and Elbert took it that way. After Cephas left, Elbert didn't say anything for a long while. He walked around to the front of the bus and lifted the hood and stood looking down into the engine bay. Eunice knew that silence. She had been married to it the better part of 50 years. She climbed up into the bus and stood at the steel counter and looked at the cold griddle and the recipe tin and the ledgers and the letter with its unfinished sentence. She picked up the card again, the one about the short milk. She read it one more time. Then she went still in a way that Elbert would have recognized had he been watching. But he was under the hood. She set the card back in the tin. Elbert, she called out through the open door. Yeah, what are you thinking? A long pause, the sound of him moving around under the hood. I'm thinking this is a 454 cubic inch engine and the block isn't cracked, he said finally. I'm thinking somebody drained it and covered it before they parked it, because there's no rust in the cylinders I can see. I'm thinking I have my father's tools in the truck and I have got nothing else in the world to do today. Another pause. I'm thinking I like to hear it run. He looked up at her, and there was something in his face that she had not seen there since before the surgery, not since the months when she had been sick, and he had been trying to hold everything together with both hands and a heart that was held together with thread. It was the look of a man who knew what he was for. All right then, Eunice said. She turned back to the counter, ran her hand along the cold steel surface, looked up at the words above the serving window. Everybody eats. She didn't know yet what that was going to mean for them. Didn't know about the children who would come across the road in the dark, drawn by the smell of biscuits. Didn't know about the old man on the river road who hadn't had anyone sit in his kitchen since his wife died. Didn't know about the girl who took 2 every morning and hid 1 in her coat. She didn't know about any of that yet. She just knew that somebody had built this kitchen with whatever she had left after everything was taken, and that whoever had built it had understood something that Eunice had spent 31 years in a school cafeteria trying to understand, that a hungry child is not just hungry in the stomach, that knowing someone sees you, knowing someone thought to save you, the crust ends because they remembered you liked them, knowing you are not invisible. That is a different kind of hunger, and it is the kind that does not get fixed by policy or procedure or a tray slid through a window by someone who does not know your name. It gets fixed by someone who wrote it down, who wrote down what you liked. Eunice stood in Bertel Tatum's bus on a cold November morning in Harwick County, Tennessee, with $64 to her name and no plan, and a husband listening to a dead engine the way he listened to everything that mattered. And she made the only decision that felt true. She was not going to Cedar Home Care She was not going to sit in a chair in a building in a county she had never lived in while there was a pot in this bus and somebody out there hungry. Outside, the sound of Elbert's wrench against iron rang out clean and sharp in the cold morning air. It echoed off the dead pump island. It sounded, she thought, exactly like starting over. It took him 3 days, 3 cold November days on a concrete lot in Hartwick County with his father's tools and 40 years of diesel instinct and a wife who handed him things without being asked. That was the part nobody would have expected. Eunice Leland spent those 3 days learning to read an engine, not because she had to, because she was there, because she had nowhere else to be, because somewhere in those first hours of watching Elbert work, she understood that this was not just mechanical. This was something else. This was her husband deciding to still be himself, and she was not going to miss it. She cleaned while he worked, pulled 15 years of grime off the steel counter with a rag and a bucket of water from Cephas's spigot, scrubbed the cast iron griddle with a wire brush she found in the supply bin at the back of the bus until the metal came up dark and honest, lifted the canvas tarps off the pots one by one and found them solid, found the coffee urn with its tap intact, found the cafeteria trays stacked in order, each one wiped clean before it was put away, because Bertelle Tatum had been the kind of woman who cleaned before she left, even when she knew she wasn't coming back. On the second afternoon, Elbert called her over to the engine bay. "Look at this." He pointed at a line running from the fuel tank toward the carburetor, varnish buildup thick and brown, clogging the passage almost completely. Been trying to figure out why the lines weren't holding prime. Thought it was the pump. Eunice looked. She had been cleaning the interior wall above the serving window when she'd noticed a small tube running through from the outside, half hidden behind the counter edge. She hadn't known what it was, but she'd followed it with her eyes down through the floor and thought that goes somewhere important. "I saw that from inside," she said. "The tube, I thought it connected to something." Elbert looked at her, then looked back at the line. "You found it," he said, quiet, the way he said things that mattered. Not "you helped," not "good eye," just "you found it," which was the most Elbert Leland had ever said about anything. She went back inside and kept cleaning, and she thought about Bertelle Tatum walking these same steps every morning, lighting the same burners, opening the same window, and she thought that woman knew exactly where her blocked lines were too. She just kept cleaning around them until she could fix them. On the third evening, the light went gold and long across the dead lot. Elbert poured a cup of fresh gas down the carburetor, climbed into the cracked driver's seat, pumped the pedal twice and turned the key. The engine ground, caught, coughed out a cloud of blue smoke that smelled of 15 sleeping years, and then it shook itself and settled into a deep, lumpy living idle. The whole bus trembled with it. The gauges twitched up off their pins, and Eunice laughed. A real one, the first one since the morning at the curb. It came out of her before she could decide about it, and it carried out across the empty concrete and bounced off the dead pump island and went somewhere up into the cold Tennessee sky. Elbert sat in the driver's seat with his hand on the wheel, the old engine running under him, and on his face was something she had been waiting to see come back for months, the look of a man who was good for something. He shut it down before it could overheat. The silence after was enormous, and that was when his chest decided to remind him. It came on as it always did, a slow closing fist behind the breastbone, an ache that ran up into his jaw. He had been hauling a propane bottle up the bus steps an hour before, and the bill was coming due. He sat still and got the little brown vial out of his shirt pocket, shook a nitroglycerin tablet under his tongue, waited with his hand flat on the wheel while Eunice stood in the doorway, watching his face go gray and not letting herself say anything until it passed. It passed. It always passed. So far. That's enough for today, she said when his color came back. I'm all right. I know you are. A beat. That's enough for today. He didn't argue, which told her more than anything else could have. That night, she cooked on the griddle. She had not planned to. They had a half bag of flour and a can of drippings and a little salt and not much else, and she had meant to fry flat cakes on the camp stove like every other night. But the griddle was right there, scrubbed bright that afternoon by her own hands. The propane was hooked up, and she found she could not help herself. She lit it. She mixed the dough soft and added extra drippings for the short milk the way the card said, and she rolled it out on the steel counter with a jar because she had no rolling pin. Cut the biscuits with the rim of a coffee can. The griddle came up to heat, and the fat went shiny, and she laid the rounds down, and they took hold with a sound and a smell that rolled out the open serving window and across the cold, dark lot. A smell is just a smell, except on a cold night it carries a long way. And they were not the only people in Hartwick County sleeping somewhere they would rather not be. The boy came first, 9 years old maybe. He came up out of the dark at the edge of the lot and stood at the bottom of the bus steps with his hands in the sleeves of a coat too big for him, not asking for anything, just standing in the smell. Behind him, hanging back by the road, a young man held a smaller child against his shoulder, maybe 30, tired face, unshaved. He started apologizing before anyone said anything. I'm sorry. We don't mean to bother you. He stopped. We smelled the bread. We'll go on. Eunice looked at the boy at the bottom of the steps. She looked at the man holding the little one. She had spent those years behind a cafeteria counter, reading the faces of children who had not had supper. She knew this one before he said another word. You'll do no such thing, she said. Sit down right there on that step, both of you. I just this minute pulled these off, and they're no good cold. And, without quite deciding to, without any plan at all, Eunice Leland split 4 hot biscuits, laid drippings and salt across them, and handed them down out of the serving window of a dead woman's supper bus to 2 strangers and a hungry child in the dark. The boy ate his standing up, did not say thank you because his mouth was full. The young father said it twice for him. The little one woke up enough to gum a crust. His name was Harkis DeVoe. He had lost his wife and his job inside the same bad year, and he was raising his 2 little ones in a single room above the laundromat on Meade Street. He told them none of this that night. That night, he just said thank you and meant it and went back up the road into the dark with the rest of the biscuits wrapped in a dish towel and a promise to bring it back. Eunice sent him off with it anyway, because some things you give before you know why. After they had gone, she sat down at the little fold-down table inside the bus in the dark, the warm griddle ticking as it cooled. Elbert came and sat across from her, Bertel's ledger still open on the table, the county map unrolled beside it, Bertel's red ink tracing the river road out past the edge of town to where the hollows started, and one stop circled at the very end with a question mark. A family with a daughter named after a Eunice put her hand flat on the open ledger. On all those names, on all those children, somebody had loved enough to write down what they liked. Elbert, she said. He waited. We don't have anything. We're sleeping in a truck. You've got a heart that's held together with thread. My hands don't work half the days, and we are too old and too poor to be of use to anybody, and I know all that." She looked at him across the little table, but that woman left a list of children she didn't get back around to, and we are the only two people left alive who can read her handwriting and run her bus and cook her recipes. Her voice was steady, steadier than it had been in weeks. "And I am not going to sit in a chair in a building in the next county while there's a pot in this thing and somebody out there hungry." Albert looked at the map, at the red road running out to the circle with the question mark at the end. "Then we'd best find out," he said. "Who's still out there?" It moved faster than either of them expected. Kindness travels quick in a place where everybody is one bad winter from needing it themselves. Eunice went to Pearlie Hughes's diner first. Pearlie ran a place on the county road that had been there since before the bypass went in, and she knew everyone and was known by everyone, and she was the kind of woman who kept the same coffee price for 15 years because she understood that some of her regulars were down to counting. Albert went in for $1 coffee and got to talking. When he mentioned Bertell Tatum's name, Pearlie set her rag down, came around the counter, sat down across from him in the booth like she had been waiting for this conversation. "I ate off that bus when I was 6 years old," she said. "My daddy was on strike that whole winter. Bertell Tatum kept half this county's children alive, and nobody ever called it charity because she never once made you feel it." She looked at Albert a long time. "You're really going to run it again?" "My wife is," Albert said. "I just keep it running." Pearlie got up, went in the back, and came out with 2 loaves of day-old bread and a 5-pound bag of pinto beans, and would not take a dime for them. "Day-old's going in the trash anyhow," she said, which was not true, and both of them knew it was not true, and that was the first donation. The church ladies heard within 3 days. They arrived on a Saturday with flour and eggs and a case of canned milk and a dented commercial roaster one of them had been storing in her garage since the last funeral dinner. They did not pray over the Lelands or ask them to come to service. They just unloaded their cars, looked the bus over, told Eunice her griddle needed a good seasoning, and left. The principal at the elementary school was harder. She had rules. She met Eunice in the parking lot one afternoon and listened with her arms crossed. "I can't officially endorse anybody handing out food at my school." She looked over her shoulder. "But there's a gravel lot across the road from the bus stop that the county owns and nobody watches. And I've got 11 children on my roll right now that I know for a fact come in Monday mornings not having eaten since Friday lunch." She handed back Eunice's folded paper without taking the information off it. "I never told you any of that." "Told me any of what?" Eunice said, and the principal almost smiled. Harcus DeVoe came back with the dish towel washed and pressed. Then he kept coming, showed up early, started hauling propane without being asked, just working, asking nothing. And Albert let him because a proud man needs a way to pay that isn't money. His 2 little ones started riding along on Saturdays, a boy of 7 and a girl of 5. They appointed themselves in charge of the napkins and the plastic spoons, and they took the job with the gravity of sworn officials. Albert built them a small step stool so they could reach the serving counter. It was the first thing he had built for a child in 20 years, and he found he had missed it more than he had let himself know. They made their first run on a Tuesday because Bertell's card said Tuesday was the school, and it felt wrong to start on any other day. Albert had the engine purring, patched the propane lines, replaced the cracked window with plexiglass, got the serving shutter to lift and latch, painted over the gray primer streaks so the blue letters stood out clean again. Bertel's Kitchen. Everybody eats. He never once considered changing the name. They parked on the county gravel across from the school in the cold blue dark at 6:30. Eunice lit the griddle. By the time the first school bus groaned up the road, the smell of biscuits and sausage gravy was rolling out across the lot. The children came across the road in twos and threes, drawn to it, shy at first. Children always are. A little boy in a thin coat stood at the bottom of the steps with his hands jammed in his armpits and would not come up. Eunice leaned out the serving window and stopped because she knew this boy, not his name, but his face. He had his sister's jaw, his sister's way of holding still when she was unsure, and his sister was Delia Combs, who had been in second grade at Mill Creek Elementary 4 years ago and who had eaten in Eunice's cafeteria every single Thursday when Eunice made sure to leave an extra portion at the end of the line. Not obvious, not called out, just there for whoever needed it. Delia was in 7th grade now, and here was her brother. "You like gravy," Hunt Eunice said, "or are you a plain biscuit kind of fellow?" The boy looked up. Something in his face shifted. "Gravy," he whispered. "Smart man." She handed it down on one of Bertel's brown trays. "Sit on that bench there, and mind you don't burn your mouth." He sat. He ate. And Eunice turned back to the griddle and felt all those years of cafeteria mornings fold into this one like they had been leading here the whole time. She had not known Delia's little brother's name, but she had left that extra portion every Thursday for 2 years, and now here he was, standing at the bottom of the steps she was standing on, some circles close quietly, without announcement. That first morning they fed 19 children and ran out of gravy doing it. Eunice thinned what was left with hot water and a little more flour and a hard shake of pepper, and not one child knew the difference. She heard Bertel in it. They won't know the difference, and it sticks to their ribs longer. By the 3rd Tuesday, there was a line. Word had run through the school in a single day, the underground telegraph of children, and they came hungry and unembarrassed because Eunice had a gift for it, a gift a long career in the making. She never once asked a child if he was poor. She asked him if he wanted 1 biscuit or 2. She knew that a child will take food from someone who is glad to give it and starve in front of someone who pities him. And she made sure not one of them ever felt pitied. Then it happened. Somebody parked across the road one morning and filmed the whole thing on their phone. The old couple and the blue bus and the line of children and the serving window with its hand-lettered sign. They put it on the internet with a few sentences about the couple in Harwick who got put out by their own kids and started feeding the county out of a $16 bus. And the thing did what those things do. By the weekend, it had been watched more times than there were people in the whole state. Strangers started sending $5 bills to Pearlie's Diner because it was the only address anyone could find. Pearlie put a second coffee can on the counter, and somewhere in the county, somebody saw his mother on the internet. Morton drove up on a Tuesday afternoon. Good car, good coat, a folder under his arm, and a man in a gray suit walking 2 steps behind him, like punctuation. Eunice saw them coming from inside the bus and felt something in her stomach go flat and still. Not fear, not quite. Something older than fear. Recognition. Morton stopped at the bottom of the bus steps, looked up at the blue letters. Something moved through his face that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite shame and settled somewhere in between. Mom? Dad? He opened the folder on the bus steps. I've been talking to some people. What you two have built here, it's really something. It's all over everywhere." He turned a page. "We can set this up properly. A real nonprofit, a board of directors, corporate funding instead of a coffee can. I would run the business side. You wouldn't have to worry about any of the hard parts." A pause. "We could get you two into a proper place, assisted living. You could come out and visit the bus whenever you felt up to it. Cut a ribbon. Be the faces of it." He looked up, waiting for it to land. Albert let him finish. Let the silence go on a few beats past, comfortable. Then, without heat, without anger, without any of the things that might have made this easier, "You want to put your name on the front of it," Albert said, "and put us in a home in the back of it." "Dad, that's not—" "It is, son. It's all right. I'm not even angry." Albert closed the folder, held it out. "There is one job here. You pick up a dish towel and dry pots at 5 in the morning in the cold with your hands cracking and no cameras. That's it. That's the whole job. There's no managing it. There's no board. There's just doing it." He kept his voice level, kept his eyes on his son. "The offer's open if you ever want it, but you don't get to run a thing you wouldn't carry." Morton stood there with the folder. He looked at his mother. She said nothing. He looked at the blue letters on the side of the bus, at the line of empty trays stacked in the window, at the man in the gray suit who had suddenly found something very interesting to look at on his phone. Whatever was in Morton that might have answered, he could not get it past the part of him that needed the cameras. He said he would think about it. He walked back to his car. But Cressy did not walk back with him. She had been standing a little apart the whole time. Now she came forward, and her face was the face of a person who had not slept well in several weeks, maybe longer. She stopped in front of her mother. She did not ask to be forgiven, which was how Eunice knew it was real. "I drove up to Cedar Home and put a deposit down on a room for you two," Cressy said. "Flat. Terrible in its flatness. I sat in the car while Morton told you there was nothing to come back to. I looked at my phone so I wouldn't have to look at you." Her voice was steady but only just. "I've thought about it every day since Mama. Every single day. I don't have any excuse. I just went along because going along was easier than fighting Morton, and I have hated myself for it the whole time." Her voice broke on the last word, all the pieces of it. "I'm not asking you to forget it. I just want to help. Please let me help." Eunice looked at her daughter for a long moment. 49 years of being somebody's mother had taught her the difference between a person who wants to be told it's fine and a person who wants to make it right. She could see which one was standing in front of her. She reached behind the door, took down the spare apron, the one with the scorch mark on the hem, held it out. "We start at 5, she said. "It's cold and there's no thanks in it, and the first batch of biscuits is the hardest because your hands aren't awake yet." Her own voice was not quite steady. "Be here at 5 or don't bother coming at all." Cressy took the apron in both hands, held it against her chest, nodded, couldn't speak, and that was the whole reconciliation. It was enough because it was true. The county notice arrived on day 14. A man named Plock, department jacket, clipboard. He parked across the gravel lot and watched the end of the school run from inside his car before he ever got out. He waited until the last child had crossed back to the bus stop. Then he came over, and he was not unkind about it, which somehow made it worse. "You folks are the ones running this." Not quite a question. "We are," Albert said. The man looked up at the blue letters and something crossed his face. A man who wished he were somewhere else. "I'm with the county. I got no quarrel with what you're doing here. I want you to hear me say that first." He looked at his clipboard. but you're cooking food and serving it to the public off an unlicensed vehicle. No permit, no inspection, no certified kitchen. There's been a complaint filed at the state level. Once it's on the internet, it's not local anymore. It's biscuits, Eunice said, for children. I know what it is, ma'am. His jaw worked. My daughter ate off a bus like this when she was little. He held out a sheet of paper. His hand was not quite steady, but I can't unsee it now that it's official. That's a notice. Regulations are on the back. Date is on the front. After that date, if you're still operating without a permit, I have to impound the vehicle. He looked at Elbert. I don't want to, but I have to. Elbert took the paper, looked at the man. Two men who both understood exactly what was being lost, and neither of whom had the power to stop it. The county car pulled away across the gravel. Elbert stood there with the notice in his hand and read the date, folded the paper into his shirt pocket beside the auction receipt and beside his father's watch, and did not say anything. And that was the part that scared Eunice most. Her husband had an answer for every broken thing. He had no answer for this one. 19 days. That night he did not eat. They're right, he said finally, into the dark of the truck cab. That's the awful part. They're not wrong. You can't feed a county out of a vehicle that hasn't passed an inspection in decades. If a child got sick off my gravy. He stopped. I built half my life on doing things by the book. I know that. I don't know how to fight a thing I half agree with. Then we don't fight it, Eunice said. With what money? She did not have an answer for that part, so she let it sit, and in the morning, the town began answering it for them. Pearlie put a new sign on the coffee can, Save Bertel's Bus. By noon, it was too full to close. Somebody started a paper petition outside the hardware store. Somebody else started one online. Within 4 days, the online version had more signatures than the county had registered voters. Parents Eunice had fed as children came by the lot to shake Elbert's hand. The church ladies came back with a stainless steel hand-washing sink one of their husbands had pulled from a closed restaurant. A propane refrigerator another had been meaning to throw out. Harkus organized a work crew. A boy of about 10 emptied his whole piggy bank into the coffee can at Pearlie's diner, $4 and some change still warm from his pocket. He told Pearlie it was because the bus lady gave him 2 biscuits the morning his mama was in the hospital and only charged him for being brave. Pearlie put the coins in the can and went in the back so the boy wouldn't see her face. It was a great deal of love. But love does not issue a food service permit, and the date on the notice did not move. Day 11. Harkus and Elbert were lifting the stainless steel sink up the bus steps, heavy, the kind of weight a 74-year-old man with a compromised heart should not have been lifting. Elbert knew that. He lifted it anyway, because there were children waiting. He went down on the gravel, not unconscious, but the color of ash, and the nitroglycerin did not touch it this time. Harkus drove. Eunice held Elbert's hand in the back seat. She held it and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that was better than holding on. Angina, not a full attack. This time, the doctor used those 2 words together, and then he used the rest of them. Rest, stress, age, heart, cannot sustain. Elbert lay in the hospital bed and looked at the ceiling for a long time. Maybe the kids were right, he said. Eunice stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. Don't. Not loud, but the word landed like something solid. Don't you lie in that bed and tell me the children were right to throw us away just because your heart is tired. That woman drove that bus with the cancer eating her alive because there were children who would not eat if she stopped. Her voice broke and she let it break and kept going. You are not allowed to quit easier than a dying woman did. Albert looked at his wife. We have 8 days, she said. You will rest for 6 of them, and on the 7th day, I am going to that county building, and I am going to stand up in front of whoever I have to stand in front of, and you are going to sit in that chair and let me do it. She was shaking slightly, with something that was not fear. For once in 49 years, she said, let me. Albert looked at her for a long moment. Yes, ma'am, he said. She never had to make the speech. On the 6th day, a county car came out to the lot. Eunice saw it from inside the bus and her stomach dropped. She thought early. They came early. The man who got out was not Plock. He was around 55, heavy set, in a good shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He stood at the edge of the gravel lot and looked at the blue letters on the side of the bus for a long time, like a man checking whether something he remembered was actually true. Eunice came down the steps. Can I help you? That's Bertel Tatum's bus. He said it to the letters, not to her. It was. We're running it again. The man turned and looked at her, and Eunice saw that his eyes were wet. He wasn't trying to hide it. My name is Caswell Odom, he said. I'm the chairman of the Harwick County Commission. In 3 weeks, I'm the man who signs the order to have that vehicle crushed for scrap. A pause. And when I was 7 years old, I ate off that bus every single day for 2 winters running, because my mother had walked out and my father drank what he made, and Bertel Tatum was the only reason I went to school with anything in my stomach. Eunice did not move, did not speak, just turned and went up the steps into the bus. She went to the ledgers, opened the oldest one, turned the brittle pages backward through the years until the dates reached the right winter. She ran her finger down the column of names, stopped, turned the book around on the little table. Caswell Odom, chairman of the Harwick County Commission, leaned over the fold-down table in a dead woman's bus and read one line written in a dead woman's careful hand 48 years ago. Cass, won't take it if you make a fuss. Set it down and walk off. He'll eat when you're not looking. He put his face in his hands, and he cried at that table the way a man cries when he has been carrying something too long. Eunice and Albert left him to it, because some debts are too old to settle with anything but tears. After a while, Caswell lifted his head, wiped his face with the back of his hand, looked around at the bus, at the griddle and the pots and the ledgers and the recipe tin and the small hand-lettered cards on the wall above the window. Then he reached into his coat pocket and set something on the table. The pocket watch, cracked crystal, hour hand at 4:32. Harcus DeVoe asked me to return it, he said it fell out when they were loading Mr. Leland into the car. Said it was important. Albert picked it up, held it the way he always held it. Caswell watched him. I've spent 40 years not knowing how to pay back a dead woman who fed me for free and never once made me feel like a charity case. His voice was steadier now, quiet. Let me pay it to you. He looked at Eunice. Tell me what you need. It was not magic, and it was not one phone call. Caswell Odom had spent 30 years learning how money and paperwork worked in Harwick County, and he bent all of it now toward the one debt he had been carrying since he was a 7-year-old boy who would not take food if you made a fuss about it. It took every one of the 8 remaining days and more besides. Late nights at the county building, phone calls to the state office in Nashville, a variance request that had to go through 3 separate committees before it landed on the right desk. The bus could not be a licensed kitchen on its own. That door was closed, but a licensed commissary could send food out on a permitted mobile unit. and the Harwick First Baptist Church had a kitchen that had passed its health inspection every year for 40 years of funeral dinners and potluck suppers and Christmas charity drives. And the church ladies who had arrived that first Saturday with flour and eggs and a dented commercial roaster were not the kind of women who backed away from paperwork. So the church became the commissary, the bus became its mobile unit, and the church ladies signed on as the certified food handlers, which meant the state had names it could put on a form, which was all the state had ever really wanted. Harkus organized the rest. He showed up with 3 men from his building, and they plumbed in the stainless steel sink and the propane refrigerator and built a sanitizer station from parts Caswell sourced from a closed diner 2 towns over. They installed a thermometer log on the wall beside the serving window, a hairnet box by the door, a hand-washing protocol card in a plastic sleeve. Albert did the final work himself. 6 days of rest. Officially. What that actually meant was 6 days of sitting on an overturned crate 3 feet from the bus, while Harkus and the crew worked handing tools through the door and correcting angles and pointing out things nobody else had noticed. Eunice brought him coffee and did not say anything about the fact that he was not technically resting. She had been married to this man for 49 years. She knew the difference between a man who needed to stop and a man who needed to keep going slowly. On the 8th day, Albert passed the inspection himself. First try. Plock stood on the gravel lot with his clipboard and went through every item on the form, and Albert had an answer for all of them, because a man who had kept a county's entire school bus fleet compliant with state safety regulations for 30 consecutive years knew exactly what an inspector was looking for. When Plock signed the bottom of the form, he looked up. "I'm real glad I didn't have to crush it," he said. Albert shook his hand, and that was the end of that. Caswell pushed the variance through the commission over the objection of one member who argued it set a precedent. It set a precedent. That was entirely the point. The night before the first license run, Eunice sat alone in the bus after Albert had gone to the truck to sleep. The permit in its plastic sleeve hung on a nail by the serving window where the inspector could see it. The griddle was cold. The pots were clean and stacked and waiting. She opened one of Bertel's ledgers to the back pages, past all the names, past all the winters, to the first blank page in 15 years, and she got out her pen. The little Combs boy. Likes his gravy thick. Reminds me of his sister. She wrote it down, because that was how you did it. You wrote it down. The morning of the first license run came cold and clear, one of those November mornings in East Tennessee when the sky goes blue-black before the light and the air has a bite in it that wakes you up before you want to be woken. Eunice was at the griddle by 5. Cressy was there at 4:53, which told Eunice everything she needed to know about her daughter's state of mind. She came in quietly in her old coat hair, not fully done, and she stood in the bus doorway for a moment like she wasn't sure she was allowed to step all the way in. "Apron's on the hook," Eunice said, without turning around. Cressy put it on. They worked side by side in the narrow kitchen and did not talk very much, and that was fine. Some things do not need talking. Some things need doing. Cressy watched her mother's hands and followed them. When Eunice thinned the gravy, Cressy thinned hers the same way. When Eunice pressed the biscuit rounds with the coffee can rim, Cressy pressed hers the same way. Around 5:30, Cressy burned the first 4 biscuits. Not badly, just the bottoms, a little darker than they should have been. "Griddle runs hot on the left end," Eunice said. "I see that now. Bertel's card says the same thing. I found it in the tin. A pause. She wrote it in 1987. Cressy looked at her mother. Eunice shrugged. Some griddles are just like that. And something shifted between them in the space of that sentence. Not forgiveness, not resolution, something quieter and more durable than either. The understanding that they were both standing in the same kitchen now, learning the same griddle, reading the same cards. That had to be enough to start with, and it was. More people came that morning than the gravel lot had held since it was a working filling station. Pearlie came. The church ladies came in their good coats and pulled aprons on over them without being asked. Harcus brought his 2 little ones, the girl solemn with responsibility over her napkin assignment. Caswell stood at the back of the crowd with his hands in his pockets and did not make a speech. He understood it was not his morning to speak. Cephas Drury came too, standing at the back, the way he always stood without making a fuss. There was a television camera, one crew from the Knoxville station that had seen the viral video. Morton had been told about the camera. Morton did not come, and Eunice found when she looked for the feeling that was supposed to be there about that it was smaller than she expected. Not gone, but smaller, like a stone she had been carrying in her shoe for so long she had stopped noticing the weight until the moment she reached down and found it. She had other things to do. The children came across the road in the cold blue dark, in 2s and 3s, drawn to the smell, and Eunice leaned out the serving window of Bertel Tatum's bus and asked each one of them the only question that had ever mattered out there, 1 biscuit hawn or 2. Halfway through the rush, Eunice's hands seized up, the cold and the repetition and 49 years of use catching up all at once. She stepped back from the window and flexed her fingers and looked at them like they had betrayed her. Cressy was there before she finished the thought. Took the spatula, took the window. She had never cooked for a crowd in her life. She burned the next 2 biscuits and got the ones after that right, and did not stop until the last child in line had been served. Flour on her elbows, hair coming loose, face flushed from the griddle heat. The television camera caught it. Cressy didn't notice, which was the only reason it was worth catching. After the school run came the river road. This was the part Eunice had been thinking about since the night she read Bertel's ledger by flashlight on the floor of a bus she didn't know yet was going to become her life. The school had a free lunch program now. Imperfect, underfunded, but it existed. The old people out the hollows had nothing. The nearest grocery store was 40 minutes each direction, and there were men and women out on those back roads who had not had a hot meal prepared by another human being in longer than was decent. Bertel's map had the stops marked in red. Most of the original names were gone. 15 years. People moved or died or got moved into facilities, and new people took their places in the same houses on the same roads, because poverty does not leave a hollow just because the faces in it change. The first stop on the river road was a wide place in the road with a rusted mailbox and a porch that needed painting. An older man, maybe 80. He came out when he heard the engine moving slow with a cane, and he squinted at the bus from under his hat brim for a long moment. Eunice leaned out the window. "Morning, we've got biscuits and bean soup today." He squinted harder. "That's Bertel's bus." "It is. She used to stop here." "I know. We're picking up her route." He worked that through, something complicated happening on his face. "She stopped coming about 15 years back. She got sick. She passed. I'm sorry." A long pause. "She made good cornbread," he said finally. "I'll put it on the menu for next week," Eunice said. "Thursday." He came and took the soup, and at the third stop, Cleet Purdy came out onto his porch when he heard the engine and stood there blinking in the winter light like a man who had not used his voice in several days, which it turned out was close to true. "I thought that was you," he called out, then stopped, looked at two strangers in Bertel's bus, confusion moving across his face. "Bertel passed a long time ago," Eunice said gently. "We bought her bus. We're carrying it on." Cleet Purdy worked that through. His face did what old faces do when something they had given up on turns out not to be entirely gone after all. "She used to bring cornbread," he said. "Sundays, she'd sit a while." A pause. "My wife's been gone 6 years. Bertel would sit a while so the house wasn't so quiet." His voice cracked on it. "Nobody's sat in that kitchen since." Eunice climbed down from the bus, slow, on Elbert's arm. "Put the coffee on then," she said. "We've got 20 minutes before we have to be down the road, and I'd be glad to sit." So they sat. The coffee was bad, burnt and thin. The visit was exactly 20 minutes, and Cleet talked the whole time, filling the air the way a man does who has had too much silence and not enough outlet for it. When they left, he stood on his porch and watched the bus out of sight, and Elbert, driving, said nothing, because some things do not need commentary. They just need to be done. Farther out at a stop, Bertel had marked, but not named, a woman past 80, met them at her screen door with her chin up and her pride arranged in front of her like a fence. She did not need anything. She got along just fine. The county didn't need to be sending people out here. Eunice did not argue. She said the beans would go to waste otherwise, and she had too many to carry back. And then she asked, almost as an afterthought, whether the woman happened to know how to make a proper chow-chow that would set right in the jar, because Eunice had been trying to get hers right for 20 years, and something was always off with the brine. The woman's chin came down about half an inch. "How much vinegar are you using?" 2 cups per batch. The chin came down further. "That's your problem right there." The next week, the woman was waiting at the screen door before the bus turned the corner, a jar of chow-chow in her hand and a handwritten recipe card folded under it. She thrust them both through the window before Eunice could say anything, and then took the beans like she was doing everyone a favor, which she was. Pride goes down easier when you get to give as well as take. Eunice wrote it in the ledger that evening. Eunice had noticed the girl from the first week. 14 years old, she came to the school stop every morning without fail. Quiet, fast. She ate her biscuit in about 4 bites, and then when she thought no one was looking, she slid a second one off the edge of the tray and into her coat pocket. Smooth, practice, the motion of someone who had been doing this a while. Eunice saw it the very first morning and said nothing, just made sure every morning after that there was an extra biscuit near the edge of the tray, in reach, without asking, because a child who is taking food for later is a child who is feeding somebody at home, and that is not a thing you embarrass a person about. That is a thing you quietly make easier. But, she wondered, who? She wrote it in the ledger in small letters at the bottom of the page under the girl's general description, since she didn't know her name yet. Takes 2 every morning. Pockets 1. Find out who the second one's for. The answer was at the end of the river road. Bertel's map ran out there. The red ink stopped at a circled spot with a question mark beside it, and below it, in that unfinished letter, the sentence that had no ending. A family with a daughter named after a... Elbert had been adjusting the route for weeks, trying different endpoints, trying to figure out what was at the end of the road Bertel had never reached. One Thursday morning he drove past the last known stop and kept going. The road narrowed, gravel giving way to dirt, trees closing in on both sides. The bus barely fit, and then the road stopped in front of a house with a tin roof gone to rust, and a single thread of smoke coming up from the chimney, and a porch that sagged at one end, and standing on that porch, frozen, a biscuit half wrapped in a paper napkin in her hand. The girl from the school stopped. For a moment, nobody moved. She looked like a deer that had heard something snap in the dark. "It ain't stealing," she said, voice high and scared and defiant all at once. "I eat one. The other one isn't for me. I never took one that wasn't. I swear it. I would never. Honey." Eunice came down the steps, slow, Albert's hand. "Nobody said you took anything. We give them away. That is the entire point of them." She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Who's the second one for?" The girl's chin trembled. She looked back at the door of the house. Then she gave it up. All of it. The way you do when a secret gets too heavy to carry, and someone who seems safe enough finally asks. Her name was Tansy. She was 14. Her grandmother had raised her since she was small. The grandmother could not get up anymore, not reliably, not safely, and the county social worker didn't know how bad it had gotten, because if she knew, she would take Tansy away, put her somewhere, and then there would be nobody left to feed her grandmother at all. So Tansy walked 2 miles from the bus stop every morning and brought back the biscuit. It was the only hot thing her grandmother got. "Please don't tell," Tansy said, voice cracking down the middle. "Please, she's all I have." Eunice climbed those porch steps on bad knees and worse hands and went inside. The old woman in the bed was small, lighter than a thought. Her name was Lorene. She was somewhere past 80, and she smelled of lavender and old wood, and she lit up at the sound of Tansy coming down the hall, and when she saw Eunice standing in the doorway of the room, her clouded eyes went wide and then confused, and then she looked past Eunice to the window, to the bus in the yard, to the blue letters on its side. Something moved through the old woman's face, something between recognition and longing and relief. "Bertell," she whispered. "No, ma'am." Eunice came to the edge of the bed, sat down on it slowly the way you sit when you want someone to know you're staying a minute. "Bertell's been gone a long time. We bought her bus. We carry it on." Lorene's eyes came back to her, still clouded, but present. "She used to come out this road," Lorene said. "Sundays, every Sunday," and then she stopped. A pause. "I always figured she forgot us, way out here, figured we weren't worth the gas." Eunice took the old woman's hand, bird-light, the bones of it like hollow branches. "She didn't forget you," Eunice said, and her voice was doing something she could not entirely control, and she stopped fighting it. "She got sick, and she died before she could get back out here. But she wrote you down. She wrote in her letter that there was one more stop she hadn't made, a family at the end of the river road she never got to." A pause. "That was you." Lorene's hand tightened on hers, just slightly, the grip of someone who had been holding on alone for a long time and had just been given something to hold on to instead. "She also wrote." Eunice stopped, reached into her coat pocket, unfolded the letter, read the last unfinished line out loud for the first time since that night on the bus floor in the dark. "A family with a daughter named after a..." She looked at Tansy standing in the doorway. "Tansy. A tansy is a flower, a wildflower, yellow, the kind that grows in fields and along roadsides in Tennessee in the summer, the kind that nobody plants on purpose, the kind that just appears where it's needed, the kind that keeps coming back no matter what. Eunice felt the last piece settle into place, not loudly, not dramatically, the way a key turns in a lock that's been waiting a long time, with a small, solid final sound. It took 15 years, Eunice said. Her voice broke entirely on the last word, and she let it. And 2 old fools and a $16 bus. But somebody finally came back. Lorene's hand tightened again, and the old woman wept without a sound, and Tansy wept in the doorway, and Elbert stood on the porch with his hat in his hands and looked out at the bare winter trees and let them. They made that stop every day after. Elbert reworked the route so the river road ended there. Eunice went in and sat with Lorene when her hands allowed it, and sat a while even when they didn't. She brought the cornbread Bertel used to bring because she had found the recipe in the tin, and it was not complicated, just cornmeal and buttermilk and bacon drippings, and the particular confidence that comes from feeding people so long you have stopped second-guessing the amounts. Lorene ate and talked and sometimes slept while Eunice sat, and the house was not so quiet anymore. Caswell reached out to the right people in the county system quietly, with the particular skill of a man who had spent 30 years learning which doors to knock on softly. Arrangements were made, the kind of arrangements that do not make the news and do not get framed on anybody's wall, but that keep a 14-year-old girl from being loaded into a county vehicle and driven to a group home 40 miles away. Tansy stayed. On a Tuesday in early April, the dogwoods opened, just like that. One morning the hills were bare and gray, and the next morning there were white blossoms everywhere along the ridgeline, the kind of extravagant, unasked-for beauty that East Tennessee produces every spring, like it's been holding its breath all winter, waiting to show you. Lorene slept later than usual that morning. Tansy had brought the biscuit. Eunice had come in and sat on the edge of the bed, and they had talked a while, not about anything important, just about the dogwoods, just about the way the light was coming through the window, just about the spring. Lorene's hand in Eunice's, the old woman's breathing slow and even and deep. She went easily, between one breath and the next, with a warm biscuit that morning, and her granddaughter holding one hand and Eunice holding the other. The last thing she said was that the house had not been so quiet this winter. They buried her on the hill above the house on a Thursday. The death notice ran in the county paper, and the turnout surprised everyone. Old people came from across the county, gray-headed, moving slow. They came because Lorene had been one of Bertel's people, and the people Bertel had fed had not forgotten the woman who had fed them, had not forgotten each other. An old man Elbert had never seen before found him by the cars after the burial and shook his hand for a long time without letting go. "You don't know me," the man said, "but I was one of Bertel's children 60 years back, and so was half this hillside today, the gray-headed half." His chin worked. "We heard somebody brought the bus back." He never gave his name. He shook Elbert's hand and walked back to his truck. And Elbert stood there and understood that he had married into a family far larger than the one that had thrown him away. After the burial, the crowd thinned. People drifted back to their cars. Tansy stood alone by the fresh earth in a borrowed black dress that was slightly too big for her, and she stood very still, the way people stand when they do not know what the next step is or whether there is one. Eunice walked to her. She took Tansy's face in both her swollen hands, tilted it up. "We have a bus that needs somebody young enough to climb in and out of it 40 times a morning," she said, "and we have a fold-down bed in the back of it that Elbert finally built. It's not much. It's a bus. Her thumbs moved along Tansy's cheekbones. But there is a seat in it for you, and there will be for as long as I am breathing. You do not have to decide right now, but I want you to know you are not going to any group home, because you have got people now. You've got us. Tansy said nothing. She didn't need to. She just came apart against Eunice's shoulder, the quiet kind of falling apart, the kind a person does when they have been holding themselves together through sheer will for so long they have forgotten what it feels like to put it down. And Eunice held her and did not say anything else, just held on, because sometimes that is the whole thing. Caswell walked the paperwork through himself. It was not simple. The system is not built to allow a couple in their 70s living in a bus to foster a 14-year-old girl. But Caswell Odom had spent 30 years learning exactly where the system bent, and he bent it now with the same quiet persistence he brought to everything that mattered. It took 3 weeks and 4 offices and more than one late evening at the county building. But it happened. The first night Tansy slept in the fold-down bed in the back of the bus, Eunice lay awake in the front and listened, and sometime around midnight she heard it, the quiet kind of crying, the kind that happens when a person finally gets somewhere safe enough to let go of what they have been carrying. She did not go back, just called out softly, "You're all right, honey. We're right here." A long pause in the dark. "Okay," Tansy said, and she slept. And in the morning she was the first one up. It took about a month for her to stop flinching when someone was kind to her without a price attached. It took about 2 for her to start running the operation like she had been born to it. She learned the griddle from Eunice and the engine from Elbert and the route from Bertel's own marked map. She learned that Cleet Purdy took his coffee with 2 sugars and would talk for the full 20 minutes if you let him, and that was fine. That was the point, you let him. She learned that the woman at the Pride stop still called it a trade rather than charity, and that you always took whatever she offered back, even if it was just a jar of chow chow and a handshake. She learned that you put the extra biscuit near the edge of the tray without making a thing of it. She learned why. She started calling Eunice Granny somewhere in the 2nd month. Nobody decided that. It just happened one morning over a pan of gravy, natural as weather, and Eunice had to turn and face the griddle for a full minute before she could answer to it. Then Tansy found the photograph. She had taken to going through Bertel's things in the evenings, the recipe tin and the ledgers, learning the handwriting, learning the woman she had somehow inherited. One night she pulled the index cards all the way out of the tin, every last one, and at the bottom of it, flat against the green metal, was a small photograph, brittle at the edges, brown with age. A little girl in a feed sack dress, maybe 6 years old, barefoot, standing at the tailgate of an old truck, holding a biscuit in both hands the way you hold something precious, the way you hold something you did not expect to have and are not yet sure is real. On the back, in a child's careful pencil, someone had written 4 words, "The day the bread truck came." Elbert held it in the beam of the work lamp for a long time, turned it over, turned it back. "That's her," he said. "That's Bertel. Somebody fed her once when she was a hungry little thing with nothing." He set the photograph on the shelf above the griddle, where it would stay from then on, where the amber kitchen light would fall on it every morning when the gas came up. She spent her whole life paying back 1 biscuit. Eunice wrote that down in the ledger, under all the new names, under the Combs boy and Cleet Purdy's 2 sugars and the Chow Chow woman and Tansy. She wrote it down because it seemed like the truest thing anyone had figured out yet. Somebody fed Bertel. Bertel fed Caswell and half the county. The Lelands fed Tansy. One day Tansy would feed somebody else, and the bread would just keep going out the window of that bus long after all of them were gone. Morton came back once that spring. No camera, no folder, no man in a gray suit. He drove up on a Wednesday afternoon when the lot was quiet and the rush was long over and there was nothing glamorous happening, nothing worth filming. He stood around for the better part of an hour with his hands in his pockets, not helping, not quite leaving, just standing in the space of a thing he had tried to take over and hadn't been able to. Near the end, when the trays were stacked greasy in the sink, he took off his good jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and he washed one pot, just the one. He did it badly. Too much soap, not enough rinse. Elbert watched him do it and did not say a word about the technique. When Morton left, he did not say much, and Elbert stood at the small steel sink and looked at the clean pot drying on the rack and decided that one pot was a place a man could start from, if he wanted to. Some men do, some men don't. Time would tell. One evening in late April, Eunice and Elbert sat outside on folding chairs beside the bus, the last light going long and amber across the concrete. Tennessee in the spring, the air full of dogwood and something green underneath it. Tansy was inside washing the trays, singing something under her breath, and the sound of it drifted out through the serving window like something easy. "You remember the morning at the curb," Eunice said. Not a question. "I do." When Morton said there was nothing to come back to, she looked at the light on the old pump island. He was right in a way. There wasn't. We had a house and 3 children and 49 years, and we lost the house and 2 of the children on the same rainy morning. And I thought that was the end of us. She found his hand. I truly did. Elbert's thumb moved over her swollen knuckles. "Turns out," Eunice said, "family is whoever shows up hungry and stays to dry the dishes. Nobody tells you that part." A long quiet, the amber light, the sound of Tansy's voice from inside the bus, the photograph of a barefoot girl with a biscuit watching over the cold griddle. "We thought we'd lost everything," Elbert said. He held her hand. "Turned out we just got emptied out to make room." The next morning the propane hissed, and the griddle came up hot, and the children crossed the road in the cold blue dark, drawn by the smell of the one warm thing for miles. Tansy worked the window beside Eunice, quick and sure, and she knew each one of them now, knew what they liked, knew the ones who needed it to be easy to take. She did not write their names down yet, but she was learning them. And one day she would open a ledger to a blank page and start her own column of names and what they liked and what they needed and the small things that made the taking easier, because that is what Bertel had done, and Bertel had learned it from the woman who fed her at a tailgate on a long ago morning whose name nobody wrote down and nobody remembered, except that she happened, except that she reached into a truck bed and gave a hungry child a biscuit and did not make a fuss about it. And that biscuit was still feeding people 60 years later. It turns out you can buy a great deal for $16 if you know what you are looking at. 4 wheels and a roof and a dead engine and a dead woman's unfinished kindness waiting in the dark for somebody willing to carry it forward, which is the only inheritance in this world that grows the more of it you give away. Eunice Leland was 71 years old and homeless. She had $80 to her name, and her husband spent 16 of it on a rusted bus that the whole county laughed at. It was the best $16 they ever spent.